This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and today we'll be breaking down why your supply chain is CapEx, not OpEx. My name's Conor, I'm the Communications Director here at Lokad, and joining me in studio to my left, as always, the very well-dressed Joannes Vermorel. Now, before we get started, please comment down below, first of all, where are you watching from? And secondly, do you agree, is your supply chain CapEx or OpEx? It's a very simple question. Or is it? Let's get straight into it. So, Joannes, I came back from my vacation. During my vacation, like all good employees, I rewatched all of your lectures. As long-time followers of Lokad will know, Joannes has a long-running series.
That's a very terrible way to spend your vacations, but I digress.
But I learned, monetizing my time. And in all seriousness, I did actually rewatch some, and one of them was product-oriented delivery for supply chain. And that goes way back. That's, I think, 2017, something like that. And in that, there's a really nice gem of an insight. There's many, but one in particular struck me, where you argued, and that's what brought this about, that you should reconsider your supply chain not OpEx, not an expense, not a liability, but more as a productive asset, one that can generate value. Again, like machinery, the cars, whatever. So my first question, have I broadly summarized the thesis correctly?
Yes, and by supply chain, I really mean the decision-making part of the process, not the supply chain infrastructure. Yes, a warehouse is obviously an asset, but here we're talking about the machine or the organization or the process or the whatever that generate all the mundane supply chain decisions that need to happen on a daily basis. What do I purchase? What do I produce? Where do I put the inventory? Should I move the prices up or down? This machinery, this organization that generate all those decisions, is it treated as an asset? And yes, my point is that I would say the mainstream practice right now, absolutely not. Supply chain, the management part, the decision-making part, is pure OpEx. It is a cost center. It is whatever it takes, has as many planners it takes to just get the jobs done, and this is it.
Okay, so let's be really clear and as concrete as possible for this. What are the behaviors specifically that would separate what you're advancing right now from the current state of the art? So in concrete terms.
So concretely, I mean, the only part that is perceived as CapEx would be the software licenses by some enterprise software vendor supporting the decision-making processes. But that's I would say, as CapEx go, and I would say as productive asset goes, it is very, very weak in, I would say, in the supply chain world, because those pieces of enterprise software, they are extremely demanding in terms of manpower. It's literally, you can even think of those pieces of enterprise software as things that needs human coprocessors. So you have your system, your systems requires tons of manpower every day to deliver the decisions that concern the flow. And the reason why I say it's not CapEx, it's because it's not accretive. You invest 20 man days today, every day, to get the flow moving. And this is not something capitalistic. It's like you spend it and you have to spend it again and again and again. And fast forward 20 years, you still have to do the exact same thing. So you see, it's endlessly consumed, this manpower. There is nothing really creative, capitalistic about it. It is just like you need to put fuel in a truck.
Yeah.
You need to put manpower in those pieces of enterprise software. And that's why I said that by and large, companies are treating their supply chain as pure OpEx. If we put aside the small line about this license of enterprise software that is maybe considered, at least normally, in terms of accounting, as an asset, but it's still a very, very weak asset.
Is this typically is this across the board, this perspective? So is it limited to just supply chain people, or are you saying that even like at COO or CFO levels and accounting levels, they would still see it in those terms?
Plenty of cost centers inside the company. They would have the exact same approach. They would think of, for example, accounting, same thing. It's just pure OpEx. That's just the cost of being in business. You need to have this much amount of resources in terms of accounting workforce. Maybe your accounting software is a small asset, but it's certainly not really a productive asset. It's not something that is going to, on its own, generate extra profit, extra revenue. It's not a money making machine of any kind. You know, that's the difference between asset and liability.
Yeah.
Is this thing that you've purchased, will it generate money on its own? And if we look at accounting, clearly no, it's necessary, yes, but will it generate money? No, it's pure cost center. And that's the problem, I would say here. The point that I'm making is that the classical way to look at supply chain, so decision making, the decision making part, is to treat it as a pure cost center. And again, with essentially expenditure in terms of man days. Every day, a company this large need to be this many man days to keep the flow running, and that's it.
Well, we'll get into the implications of this, and again, like specifically how supply chain as an asset will work. We'll get to that, but right off the top, you mentioned decision making generating money, and you were saying that is antithetical. That is the opposite, of the current mindset. Are there any examples, like right at the start, any examples of decisions? You mentioned decisions. Any examples of decisions on a day-to-day basis that change in a company once you start thinking about your supply chain as CapEx versus OpEx?
The thing is that the idea is that if you start thinking about CapEx, you say you have to step back. Instead of thinking, I am paying people to take those decisions, I am paying those people to engineer the system that generate the decisions on its own. And that's very different, because it means that if those people that you've paid, you stop paying them, the system keep generating those profitable decisions. And that can be something as mundane as an inventory replenishment. And if it's done correctly, this is obviously a profitable operation. You convert your dollars into physical inventory, and this physical inventory will be converted back into dollars. And if those decisions are made automatically, this is like a money printing machine. You have those decisions are being made profitably for the benefit of the company, irrespective of whether people invest more time or not. In practice, you have to pay for electricity and a few things to keep the software running. But as you know, as a principle, whenever you can mechanize the whole thing, the cost of running ongoing the thing is just a tiny fraction compared to having people doing the same work. If you to look at a conveyor belt, moving things through a conveyor belt has a cost, electricity, maintenance, etc. But it's such a small fraction compared to having people to actually manually carry the items.
Well, I think we'll get straight into, again, the discussion of it as an asset, because I think for a lot of people, when they hear assets, they're still stuck on the concept of physical assets. And something that we've talked about many times is, and this is my own phrasing, you may tweak it, but supply chain is a geographically distributed network of actors. You have behaviors, you have prices. Again, that's a noun, but it's an abstract noun. So supply chain is constituted of both physical and abstract concepts. And so how do you explain the asset nature of supply chain, given that it is both physical and abstract?
I mean, think of it as a decision-making machines. You know, you have these big machines that involved literally computers, people, and it generates those decisions. And what I'm saying is that if you think about it as an asset, you think, okay, I am investing time to make the machine better. And again, because it's a machine, the fact if you stop investing in so spending people's time, the machine will just stay the same, but it is supposed to be staying the same. If you realize, so just compare, you know, the two outlook are very, very different. From the Lokad perspective, when we mechanize and then supply chain decisions, thus we treat supply chain as CapEx actually. The reality is that when supply chain scientists go on vacations, things are just fine. You know, the decisions are still generated. I mean, we have people
supervising, of course.
We have people in case of emergency that are there to supplement. But the reality is that if we just literally stop investing for a week, all the decisions are still being generated. And if we put the person back, it is to improve further. So you see, that's literally the time being spent is there for the continuous improvement. And this improvement is something that is lasting. That's why I say it's CapEx, because it's accretive. You spend this amount of days to make the machine better. And then if you let the machine run, it's still, it will run on its own. So a little bit like a conveyor belt. Yes, it needs maintenance. Yes, it's not like fully autonomous. That is true. But that's, I would say, we are talking of orders of magnitude of difference. Just like if you stop the maintenance of your conveyor belt for a day, it should be running fine. You don't have people tweaking the thing all the time. If you need to operate your conveyor belt to have someone that is always behind this damn machine, then it's a bad machine. It doesn't fulfill its role as an asset, a productive asset. It should be largely unattended.
Well, again, I like you've touched on ideas of better and worse, and making the machine better or worse.
Yes.
And again, you've used a few examples. You used a conveyor belt, which I think, works functionally. It's a function, but it's quite mundane, and I think there's probably there's a ceiling to how high you can make that better or appreciate the asset. So I just want to dig down a bit on that. When you say that, what is the limit to the appreciation and or depreciation of this supply chain asset? Because again, if it is an asset, it is subject to the forces of appreciation and depreciation. Otherwise, it's not an asset.
Yes, and here there is fundamentally no upper limit, because when you enter the realm of decision making, there is no ceiling. It's fundamentally, yes, if you define the problem as just narrow inventory replenishment of the things that you've already sold, then yes, there is a ceiling. The optimal replenishment, whatever it is, will only increase the profitability of your company so much. That can be a lot, but there is only so much. But then if you extend this very notion of decisions, such as when do you decide to introduce a new product? When do you decide to how much you invest in terms of promoting a given product, et cetera, et cetera. Then it becomes very fuzzy, and I would say there is no clear limit. Yes, there might be limits, but the reality is that when you're in this realm of decision-making processes, the limits are really sky high, in the sense that there is no obvious limitation. Again, if we compare that to, let's say, accounting, if you have a great accountant, it's going to be very good. If you go for the very best accountant in the world, it's not going to make that much of a difference compared to a great accountant, just because you're in the realm of compliance, not in the realm of making decisions. So now if you arbitrarily restrict the scope of those decisions, let's say we are very narrowly approaching supply chain as it can only be this short list of decisions within this frame, then yes, there is a ceiling. But if you just extend that, then there is no clear ceiling anymore. And the fact that there are companies that keeps entering the market, outperforming the former dominant companies, prove that obviously there is a way to make better decisions so that you outcompete. Every single company that has recently turned into a giant just proved that there was a better way somehow.
Well, again, in even simpler terms, again, correct me where I'm wrong, but what makes the decisions is available data, whatever that information is. So again, the more people who enter the market, the more suppliers who enter the market, the price actions of your competitors, etc. All of this stuff changes the limits. What is possible to be done tomorrow versus what was possible to be done yesterday, and what is possible today, because that shifts. So I think from that perspective, it's if you have the tooling to pull all this information into your supply chain, into your asset, there's no upper limit to how good, and by good I think you mean financially rewarding, a decision can become. Because today you made $1 profit. Tomorrow, because of a slight tweak in the circumstances of the global supply chain, that's worth $1.10. You can do it even better.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing is that if you look at other domains, let's say marketing, it becomes very, very obvious. There is no upper limit on how good a marketing tagline can be. The Just Do It of Nike is very famous. They made billions of this tagline. You see, there is kind of no upper limit on how good you can be in marketing. Obviously, in practice, it is very, very difficult to outperform. and the people who are able to be absolutely brilliant are extremely
The
rare.
Mozart of marketing.
But fundamentally, what I'm saying is that it is the sort of problems that do not have any kind of obvious limits. And if you look at outliers, and again, we are in the realm of decision making, creativity, invention, you can revisit the very frame of your decisions. It gives you enormous amount of freedom. And that's why I say no clear limit as opposed, but that doesn't mean that you don't have practical limits. Yes, you have practical limits that are your own capacity to even think or engineer this system that will generate those super decisions.
Well, in terms of the engineering of so there's two ways to think about the engineering of the system. So you have let's say the data scientists or the supply chain scientists or the decision scientists who do the literal or figurative coding, But there's also the engineering of circumstances, let's say at a company, that allows for that to happen. So to focus more on the latter from COOs and CFOs, what are actions that they can do that engineer a more copacetic or more productive environment for this kind of thinking?
I think the starting point is really have a cold assessment of the money that you're spending on decision-making supply chain broadly, which will cover planning, forecasting, s&op, all the mundane management that could be production management, inventory management, distribution management, etc., etc. Essentially all those people who are handling spreadsheets, and you have to ask yourself, am I spending money CapEx style? So I'm just spending this money because I need, otherwise the flow stop. And tomorrow, the situation will be exactly the same. I will have to repay again because fundamentally nothing has really truly changed. Or am I spending money to automate further, to improve the automation, or to even start automating? You see, and I think just the starting point before thinking really of the fine print of the engineering, how you do that, etc. Just start thinking about, is this money spent to make my decision-making machine, better? Whatever the ratio of computers versus people you have in this mix, or am I just spending money as am I spending for fuel for a truck just to keep it running? And that will not change anything about the truck once I have exhausted this fuel. So you see, that's the key insight. And I would say, if you do this core assessment, I think in most companies they will realize that the quasi-totality of the fund are just CapEx. It's like 99% is literally spent to just keep the engine running. There is very, very little about improving the engine. And improving the engine will only happen like every 5 years when they suddenly pay a large enterprise software vendor for an upgrade or something. But I think that's a really wrong way to think about it, because you see, this is very weak. It is not. It means that you are essentially treating your supply chain as, again, pure OpEx every single day, except once in a blue moon where you do the opposite. And what I would advocate is that it should be, CapEx should be every single day, whatever you spend should be to improve this asset, not once in a blue moon, like twice a decade when you decide to pick a vendor versus another.
Well, on that note, it's a perfect segue. So when you describe every day, adopt this CapEx mindset, then every day treat your spending as if it is CapEx. Okay, well, to take an example of an asset. If I buy a house, it's not, you can't with absolute exactness know what the value of my house is, but there are ways to gauge. I paid $500,000 a year ago. Here's what a similar sized house with a similar energy rating sold for in the area. Okay, it looks like my asset has appreciated 10% or depreciated 5%, whatever. From the perspective of supply chain as CapEx or as an asset, how exactly do you propose measuring the appreciation and or depreciation of that asset class?
So it is extremely difficult because fundamentally you are dealing with counterfactual. So you see, if my supply chain was run by a different machine, how profitable or unprofitable would it be? So it makes the investigation quite difficult. Nevertheless, in practice, it's not that difficult, because you can look at all your basic, performance indicators, inventory turns, profitability, inventory write-off, overall quality of service, etc. And if your machine is well oiled and improving, those things should improve. So again, you have to look at counterfactuals, because, for example, your improvement might be undermined by the fact that suddenly your suppliers are having tons of trouble and your lead times have increased enormously since you started working. So you cannot, you need to factor all those elements. So it's difficult to have a metric, but fundamentally, while this is difficult, it is just the same as, it is the same sort of problem that every, for example, software vendor has to face. And by the way, there is a reason for this similarity, because it's, if you treat your supply chain as a machine that generates decision, then you are dealing with essentially a software asset. And just think of, how does Microsoft judge that when they spend this amount of days improving Microsoft Word, that they have actually improved Microsoft Word? It becomes a very diffuse problem. It is difficult to grasp exactly why you're spending resources to improve the engineering. What are you exactly improving? But nevertheless, even if it's difficult, the progress is very tangible and very real. And when you go back to any kind of, I would say, software, just try the version that they were releasing 2 decades ago, and you would say, oh, this version 20 years ago, it was such a piece of crap. And the one that I have now is so much better. I mean, unless the software vendor is dismal in its progress, it is a typical path that you would observe. So that's the same sort of thing that should be happening for your supply chain, meaning that this machine should be taking, there should be fewer and fewer areas where you need those human coprocessors. That's one thing that you can measure in a way that is very straightforward. You can also just assess how deep your decision goes. For example, are you able to deal with multi-sourcing, or are you still sticking to, I would say, very crude sourcing heuristic where you cannot handle multi-sourcing? Are you is your reordering really smart with full truckloads, full containers, or no? Are you able to truly leverage price breaks that your suppliers offer, et cetera, et cetera? So there are plenty of things where, even if again, it's very difficult because you don't ever have actual counterfactuals, what would have happened without this improvement. You can still have like back of the envelope calculations, say, okay, last quarter, we managed to really improve our heuristics for full containers, shipments. We didn't do that in the past. This is now done quite carefully, and I can assess that the extra payback is roughly that. You see, that's the sort of things where it is approximate, but when the improvement is real, people have very little. I mean, it doesn't take that much work to convince yourself that you have tangible results. If it's almost impossible to identify any kind of tangible outcome, then probably your improvement was not real. It was just an idea that you had, but not something that really mattered for your company.
Well, this actually, again, when we talk about heuristics, one of the things that people often strive for with any kind of digital transformation, of course, is a greater sense of resilience. And people often see assets as resilient to shocks. For example, anytime the market crashes, gold spikes. So do you see this supply chain as CapEx perspective providing any concrete resilience boost in the face of things like, let's say, COVID or Suez Canal incidents or anything like that? Like, if you can compare the OpEx perspective in those situations and the CapEx perspective in those situations.
Yes, I mean, if you're OpEx, that means that you are essentially trying to optimize your resources so that, what does that mean? That would mean 100% utilization of your resource, which are people. So your people are working, at 100% to keep the flow running. If they are only working at 70%, then you're wasting 30% of their time where they are just doing nothing. So you see, that's the problem of approaching with OpEx, is that what you want is this 100% utilization. Now, what about a disruption, as you were saying? Well, a disruption, the thing is that because of the disruption, obviously, you will have to deal with things that are unusual. And that will require, because we don't have, general AI yet, so that will, by default, involve people. You see, you've built a machine, but the machine is not, it's not sentient. It's not able to deal with extraordinary circumstances on its own. It's going to fall back on people for those events. Question, are those people even available to cope with that? And my answer is, if you're in this OpEx mode, the reality is that everybody is like a 100% utilization. And you can see that one symptom of that is in the company, everybody is firefighting. And the supply chain director is jungling with 5 emergencies per day. And that's a sign of very high utilization. When there is constant firefighting, where people are being a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of stuff, and routinely it bubble up to the higher layers. In contrast, if you're in CapEx mode, people are spending their time to improve the machine. And if there is a description, they just stop their work, which is improvement, and they can go into damage control, because they are not fully utilized just to keep the mundane operation running. You see, so that's where it's I think in terms of resilience, this CapEx that I advocate gives you a lot of leeway to deal with the exceptional, because people are not 100% utilized just to cope with the mundane. Literally, they can, if you are in this CapEx mode where you have this machine that generates decisions, everybody can go on vacation for a week. And unless this is the precise time where there is a complete new set of, let's say, tariff policies, it will be just fine. So you see, if you're not at the specific time where chaos unfolds, it will be fine. Which means that if chaos unfolds, those people can readily jump into tackling in terms of damage control, this disruption, instead of being completely drawn already under the daily humdrum.
Well, this is then to build on that. I think I might be from the same lecture, or maybe it's 1.4. But talking about the agility and responsivity of a decision-making engine. So when those events strike, you don't want to have to convene 100 people all in the same room or on a Teams call. You want the engine, in this case the asset, to be able to quickly adapt to these shocks.
But
as well.
that's also that's the second part to the answer, is that if you have this machine, then you see, if you have like a large-scale disruption, the amount of stuff that you will need to tweak is enormous. So if you have dozens of people that you have to retrain, adapt their policies, etc., that will take time. I mean, even if you're like super diligent, it will take weeks. The thing is that if your decisions are under the control of essentially a piece of software, you can duct tape in a matter of hours, maybe a day or two at most, something crude that at least does this damage control at scale. You see, and that's something that Lokad we have done numerous ways during the last decade. But fundamentally, it's that's second thing, is that those people who have bandwidth availability to deal with the damage control, when they will want to act, they will not go through a software, through, I would say, workflows that don't even fit the emergency, because the workflows are optimized for productivity, for daily tasks, as you usually do them. You can directly go in the code and inject your heuristics to deal with the problem at scale. And as soon as you restart the engine, you will generate revised decisions that embrace this new reality. Just to give you an example, they would say, oh, what if, for example, the company lost suddenly access because a large bank that was servicing the company just canceled a big line of credit. So overnight, the amount of liquidity accessible to the company has been, let's say, divided by 2. Okay, so suddenly you have like a liquidity crunch. You have a problem. You don't have enough money to buy all the stuff that you would need to buy. Question, how do you revise end-to-end all your purchasing policies and so that it fits this new reality, at least for the time being, until somebody in finance manage to find another source of liquidity? you see, that's the sort of things where if you have people, it's going to be very complicated. That will take weeks. If you have a machine and you have a numerical recipe with economic drivers, you would just say, okay, cost of cash, bam, I inflate this factor by maybe 10x just because I have this liquidity crunch. And that will automatically eliminate any kind of decision that is not very, very shortly cash positive to cope with this problem of lack of liquidity.
Well, thank you. Before we push on to some of the public comments and a couple of DMs, just one last thought. Again, we've talked about the asset, we've talked about the perspective of the CapEx mindset, but as I've written here, you haven't commented specifically on what are the tools or techniques or methodologies that mark the kind of perspective that you're saying. Like technologically, what makes that asset appreciate?
I mean, we are literally software improvement. I mean, it's in practice, we have when I was saying the machine, with computers and people in the mix. Yeah. Okay, this is essentially a big software project, but I believe that supply chain, when approached in a modern way, this decision-making game is fundamentally a software game. Yes. And now you have to think of how do I make this piece of software that is completely specific of my company. That's a catch, is that it cannot be a generic piece of software because it has to completely embrace the exact data sources that you have, the exact strategies that you have. And at scale, if we're looking at companies that are, let's say, $100 million and above, there is no two companies that are exactly alike. Same, yeah. There is always differentiation. Every large company occupies some kind of economic niche of its own.
And has their own economic
so this
drivers,
machine is going to be specific to you. It doesn't mean that there can't be similarities or component being reused, etc. But fundamentally, because you are bringing together all the data sources and the strategy of the company, this piece of software is going to be very dominantly something that is completely specific of this one company. And at Lokad, we are serving, again, over dozens and dozens of companies, and they are each one has numerical recipes that are completely their own. Because even if companies are similar, we find out that there are like profound differences.
And when you, again, just to tie a bow on that, when you drop the term numerical recipes, you're essentially referring to the asset itself, the algorithm that generates the decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's unique to each person.
And the numerical recipe is a loose term that it can involve plenty of algorithms, plenty of heuristics, plenty of stuff. Some very smart, some not so smart. It's literally all the plumbing that goes from all the input data till the decision that you need to generate.
And that's the way to visualize the asset, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, at this point, Joannes, I will push on because we've been talking for about 35 minutes. This is I'm just going to read this as a comment. I don't see a question mark, so I'll read it. You give me your take. This from, forgive my pronunciation, Gaurav. I hope I said that correctly. From what I understand, positioning supply chain investments as CapEx highlights that building resilient networks, automation, and digital platforms are long-term assets that strengthen competitiveness and not just day-to-day costs. I presume you're in agreement with that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's where I think you have to really think of. That is mean to an end. You see, don't think I'm investing in some kind of data platform. You are investing into a machine that will make more profitable decisions.
Yes.
And really keep in mind, is this investment, is this investment aligned with this vision of generating those more profitable decisions? Because that's also another trick that you have, where you have many, I would say, pieces of enterprise software that are absolutely not capitalistic accretive. It's an example would be, okay, you have a supply chain digital twin, okay, fancy, but if it does not derive decisions on a daily basis, then what you have is a gadget and possibly an expensive one. So that's again, the only way to think of this is a productive asset is that it generates decisions on a daily basis, and those decisions generate at scale and generate the profit that funds, that makes the asset productive and profitable.
Yeah. I do think it's, and again, as always, correct me where I'm wrong, but a key detail there, and there's a reason I always jump in whenever we have that topic comes up and say at scale, because at scale is like any one person might outperform or perform as well as an algorithm on any one decision, but if you need to take 50,000 every single day, that's way beyond the bandwidth
Yes,
of a person.
and also you have the point is that even if the person outperform, the problem is that again that's OpEx, because okay, this person is very good, but this person is fundamentally not going to get better that much over time. Again, I would say the good supply chain practices have been kind of known since like the 70s. APEX now, the Association of Supply Chain in the US has been teaching those principles for decades after decades. So we have to be realistic on how much improvement we can expect. You know, it's not. It is not a domain where someone who you see someone who is going to be more productive tomorrow. It's essentially same numerical recipe, same practice. You should not be expecting when people do it manually that there will be that much improvement. So yes, at scale, but again, it's what you get by default with software. If the software is correctly engineered, essentially you can generate those decisions at any scale.
Okay, thank you. I'll push on. Sorry, I'm just. Who was it? Excuse me. If the numerical recipe, again, for simple terms, the decision-making plumbing. If the numerical recipe is the asset, who owns the versioning, rollback, and guardrails, and how do you handle model depreciation when market dynamics shift? I can reread that if you want.
Yeah, no,
There's
it's
a
okay.
few moving parts.
Yes, the numerical recipe is not the only asset. At Lokad, we have typically also things that one thing that is equally important. That's what we call joint procedure manual, which is the numerical recipe tells you the what. So it's literally how do I generate my decisions every day, and it gives you the what is happening at every stage. That's the code. The code tells you the what calculations are being done. The joint procedure manual, which is a grand manual of the initiative, gives you the why.
Yes.
Why did we choose to prepare the DR that way? Why do we choose to have this modelization rather than another? Why do we decide to express an economic driver this way or this way? So you see the combination of the two, the what and the why, are really the assets. So the numerical recipe is just, it's very important, but it's only like half of the picture. The document, which is only intended for human, that describe the why, is also critically important, because that's your entry point to know what you want to improve. You see, if you see, oh, why did I do that? Oh, it's a crude approximation just because I don't have the time to do anything better, so let it be. That's that's where in the why, that's the documentation that will tell you.
Also, the supply chain scientist. If you don't have
yes,
time to read.
and then absolutely. So you have obviously you have code, you need to have versioning, etc. Plenty of a process to release, and who should control that? The answer is supply chain. The supply chain, it should be under the umbrella of supply chain management. So ultimately, it is the supply chain director or head of supply chain who is responsible for that. It cannot be IT. Because fundamentally, you are generating supply chain decisions. So whoever, it's ultimately the responsibility is in the hand of the person who is in charge of this. And it cannot be IT. Yes, it is software, but it is fundamentally the responsibility of supply chain. Just like it would be the responsibility of marketing to spend wisely their Google AdWords budget. You see, yes, spending money on Google AdWords may require tons of tooling, but ultimately it is marketing that has to be responsible for whether this money is well spent. IT is just going to say, you know what, we can tell you if the tool is compliant. But fundamentally, it is up to you, marketing, to decide if you want to bank on some keyword and how much, etc. You have to take your own responsibility. Same applies. So for all the codes, that's a very important question. Yes, code should be versioned, it should be auditable. There should be a process for the release. Ideally, you need to have plenty of process to really to check that what goes in is correct, what goes out is correct, etc. So there is plenty of instrumentation. And again, it is fundamentally the supply chain, the head of supply chain or supply chain directors that is ultimately responsible for that.
All right, thank you. I'm going to, this is a bit more technical. So there are a few moving parts. So from a CFO's perspective, what hard evidence would you show an auditor to justify capitalizing your decision engine versus expensing ongoing operations? Or is this primarily like a philosophical position and not a strict accounting one?
So yeah, I mean, from an accounting perspective, you don't necessarily have to do that. You know, some companies do that. For example, among software companies, some companies decide to create to immobilize fund when they have software engineers that spend time on that.
Yep.
Some do not. It is more like I would say a matter of accounting clarity and whatnot. So I think for the CFO, this is I would say, don't get too much carried about the fact that you can capitalize immediately all the money invested, because if you do that, that is, by the way, a problem that software companies are facing, is that it gives a vision way too positive on spending money on this thing. You see, because if in terms of accounting, whenever you spend $1 million on a piece of software, you say, don't worry, it's the value of the asset increased by $1 million converse automatically, then you end up with a very strange problem that is, you see, it's not like driven by reality. So my take would be to take that as a grain of salt. From an accounting perspective, I would say just look at how accounting is done in software companies and stick to those general principles, which vary, by the way, from country to country. But it is really about, I think, indeed, a philosophical principle that am I investing money on something that will have, I would say, an leverage in terms of impact? Am I spending just money so that I can survive the day, or am I investing to make tomorrow better? And that's really when I say CapEx, is that you need to think of, I spend money and time and effort only on things that will make tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, etc., indefinite future better. And indeed, it does depreciate. That's absolutely correct. As a rule of thumb, at Lokad, it does depreciate relatively rapidly. At Lokad, I would say every 2 or 3 years, we end up completely rewriting our numerical recipes.
Yes.
So it's not like an incredibly long-lived asset, but still, that makes an enormous difference when you say that you have an asset that will depreciate within 3 years, as opposed to have something where if you stop investing, then tomorrow the flow stops because decisions aren't made. So you see, even if it's not like, we are not like yet on having an asset that will live for decades, it can live and does live a few years, sometimes a little bit more in companies that have that are not too extensively disrupted. Obviously, the amount of disruption really accelerates the decay.
All right. Well, Joannes, I have no further questions or comments. But before we close, covered a lot of ground here today. 60-second call to action for everyone who's been listening and everyone who will listen to this later.
Do make sure that every single investment for your supply chain are accretive in improving these decision-making machines. That's your key takeaway. Think of your supply chain organization as a decision-making machines. Forget about, having correct forecasts, correct planning, correct, all those bureaucratic tasks. Those things are just artifacts. They are not generating any profits. The only things that are generating profits are the decisions that you are taking and executing. So you should be thinking of your organization as a machine that generates that. And you should be thinking of, is the money that I invest just to keep the machine running, like electricity or fuel, or is it like engineering efforts, intellectual efforts to make it better? And my take is that, yes, there is a mix of both. For most companies, it's literally like almost 100% on just keep the machine running.
OpEx.
Pure OpEx. And once a decade, a big dose of CapEx with a vendor. And I would say it's wrong. You should really think of it as doing it much more incrementally, because this money, the profit will be, when it comes to those intellectual undertaking, this drop of investment every day has a much higher return as opposed to do it like once a decade and pour millions and then nothing for a decade. This sort of on-off techniques works very, very poorly, and that's a good way to make enterprise software vendors rich, but not your company very profitable.
All right, well, Joannes, we're out of questions, and I think we're out of time, as always. Thank you very much for your answers. And to everyone else, thank you for attending, thank you for your questions, and thank you for the private messages. I know with some of these topics, they're a little bit internally sensitive, so sometimes people are a bit shy about publicly commenting what they really feel. But as Joannes and I speak for both of us, we do appreciate when we receive those messages, and the people who asked private questions will recognize that some that I asked were ones that were privately sent. So in other words, don't be afraid to get in touch. And on that note, get back to work. Not bad.